Hi there. I'm going to walk you through an AirOps workflow that I've built to essentially augment an existing workflow that's already in progress that kind of works with the way that my brain works and the way that I create content, and hopefully it inspires you to create something similar. So it really starts here in Slack. And again, the existing automations that are already happening. So I use an AI note taker called Fireflies. At the end of a meeting, it generates a transcript and it shares via this automation the link to that transcript so I can go in and access the data. What's kind of not useful to me is that data is currently stuck inside of Fireflies, the transcript itself. And oftentimes I'm using Fireflies even outside of client meetings to do things like take like a voice memo where I'm talking about something that I want to write and then turning that into a useful blog outline and or handling any sort of follow-up to do like action items. And so I thought that AirOps would be the perfect tool to build this workflow to add usefulness to this existing automation. So let's take this transcript from today. I did a podcast interview and I've already grabbed the link here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and run this workflow. And while it's running, I'm going to explain it to you. And one thing that's really cool about AirOps is that you can create a link to your workflow where people can add those necessary inputs without messing around with the back end or without even logging into AirOps. So that's what this part is. But let's go into how I actually built it. So as you can see, and once again, it's using that transcript URL. This workflow is specifically fine-tuned around Fireflies, and the way that works will become clear as we go through. But you could certainly adapt it to whatever AI note taker you're using that has some sort of API connector that allows you to bring it into other tools. So it takes that transcript URL, that's the only input. And then what happens is it takes the URL and it takes out this transcript ID using this format JSON step. That's important because I'm going to need to use that in the next step, which is calling the Fireflies API. And while it's calling that API, it is also outputting the data from that transcript, specifically the parts of the transcript like the text itself and the speakers and other relevant details. I'm mostly interested in the text. I'm not super concerned in this workflow between like who said what, but that's something that you could probably mess around with if it was important to you and other details like that. So it takes this transcript and it pulls it into the next step, which is to prompt an LLM and add this layer of intelligence. And so the way that step is set up, just to share with you, I gave it a system prompt. You're a helpful assistant. Your job is to take a transcript input from Fireflies and make it more useful. And specifically, from the user point of view, help construct a detailed outline based on the transcript. It should include subheadings and detailed bullet points. Also, add a section for any action items mentioned and attribute them to the speaker. And specifically, I want you to take the output from that previous step as the transcript that you're going to use to then take all these actions on. It's honestly not that complicated. It's pretty simple, but this is a common workflow for me that involves a couple of different steps. And the missing piece was always taking that transcript URL that I'm already getting in Slack and like actually grabbing the useful data from it and then processing it using a tool like ChatGPT, or in this case, it's GPT 4.1, via this prompt LLM step. So it's just saving me time. And then after that, I have it integrate with Google Docs. It was really simple using AirOps to connect to Google Docs. Sometimes when you're bringing Google Docs, Google Drive, etc., into another application, it is a little bit of a complicated thing to use Google Cloud and create a project and create a service worker and all those credentials. This was as simple as just authorizing Google to have access to your AirOps account. And so as you can see, what it's doing is connecting to Google Docs. It's creating a new document. It's adding the title of the transcript URL, which is usually pretty descriptive. If it's joining a meeting, for example, it's just taking that meeting name. If it's a voice memo, I usually name it before I upload it. and then taking the output of that prompt LLM step and creating that as the document text. It's just really simple formatting. This is another thing that I could spend a little bit more time and make it a little bit more beautiful. But honestly, I'm not concerned with that at this step. I'm just interested in getting the output from that transcript and formatting it in terms of just like turning it into an outline and the action items. And just to give a little bit more color on that, so when I'm talking to myself to sort of, sort out what I want to talk about as like a blog topic, for example, I'm usually, jumping around from idea to idea. And there are, certain subheadings that kind of emerge, like these sections. And there's usually also things where I'll say, oh, I'm going to need to research that, or oh, I'm going to need to link to this or whatever. And so this works really well, both for just like making sense of a client meeting, but also making sense of what I have to do with the blog topic. And so it's multi-purpose right now, but I could go in and refine this so that it was like perfect for a client meeting as its own workflow, perfect for writing a blog outline as its own workflow. So anyway, continuing on, really the last step here is the Slack integration. And this is kind of, I would say, typical of me with like all the workflows that I build. If I'm taking data, from one tool to another, I want somewhere that's kind of, similar for me to output that data. Email gets a little messy, but Slack is great. It's always at hand. I can always search for it. And it gives me a notification when it's done, which is also great. So the way that this is set up, again, it's authenticating into Slack. It was pretty easy to set up. My note for you would be that you have to invite the AirOps bot into that channel if it's a private channel. You don't have to do that if it's a public channel. And so as you can see, it is targeting a specific channel, and it just says, here's the original transcript reporting. So this is the Fireflies link, just again for reference. And then here's the outline and action items that were generated in those previous steps and shared in a nice handy Google Doc. So let's see if it worked. So I'm going to pull up Slack. And as you can see, here's the AirOps bot. It's sharing that original transcript recording that we've already seen and used. But let's go ahead and open the doc and see what that looks like. And as you can see, it gave me a nice summary, outline, and then at the very end, we'll be able to see any action items. And as you can see right here, it's labeling them. And so this is an imperfect example because it was for a podcast interview, but the logic still processes, it still gives you a response. I could certainly play too with the formatting here, but it just wasn't important to me for my use cases. I just really wanted those links. I wanted them labeled, and the workflow works as expected. And just to go back to that initial step, you can see, here's the output in a slightly, less visually aesthetic form, but in Slack, you can see, the end result that's ideal. And so that is my most useful AirOps workflow that I've built so far, and I'm excited to build some more.